in 1916 by the American Bridge and Iron Company in Ambridge, Pennsylvania, and it was used by the Central of Georgia Railroad in Macon, Georgia at their locomotive back shops. Now, we acquired this turntable in the 1980s, moved it to this location, and we've been using it here ever since. The turntable is 80 feet long, and it weighs in at 80 tons. That locomotive right there weighs in at 120 tons. So when it's on top of the table, the overall weight between the two will be sitting right at 200 tons. So it'll probably surprise you to know that this turntable was originally turned by hand. It was an Armstrong table. There would have been poles extending off each end, and it would have taken on average 4 people to push those poles to spin the table around. But don't worry, I'm not about to ask for any volunteers. We don't do it that way anymore today. Instead, we have electrified the turntable. But don't worry about me, electricity can't go through a bad conductor. We'll be using a small 25 horsepower electric motor under the operator's shed here that our conductor Andy will be operating. Now you may be wondering, how do they spin that much weight by hand? Well, to spin it by hand, and even with that small motor today, we have to ensure the table is balanced. As the locomotive gets centered on the table here, as it does that, if you watch the far end of the table down here where I'll be at, you'll see it drop by just a few inches. When it drops, we know the table is balanced. So when it drops, he stops. The locomotive pulling our train today is the Nashville, Chattanooga St. Louis Railway number 710, the NC and St. L 710 for short. It is the oldest of our operational diesel locomotives, having been built in 1950 by General Motors Electric Motor Division, or EMD. It later saw service with the successor to Louisville and Nashville Railroad. Of course, this locomotive was built as a repair it, and even upgraded to a GP9, meaning it had its power output increased to 1,750 horsepower. Now, we acquired the locomotive after it was retired from Amtrak, restored it back to operating condition, as well as its original paint scheme, and we've been using it here ever since. If you look up in the cab here, you'll see our engineer Travis. He's responsible for operating this locomotive and getting us here and back safely today. So everyone go ahead and give him a wave. I mean, he still has to take us back after all. Now, while these are commonly referred to as a diesel locomotive, the correct term for these engines are actually diesel electric. Meaning inside this engine, there's a large diesel motor turning a generator. That generator produces electricity, which is fed down to the electric traction motors that sit on each axle of this locomotive. And it's those electric traction motors that are actually propelling the locomotive, hence the term diesel electric. So you can think of them as a hybrid of sorts. Diesel locomotives have always been made that way, and that's the way they're still made today. Whether it's Norfolk Southern, CSX, or Union Pacific, they're all diesel electrics. The major difference between the locomotives built in 1950 and the ones being made today is that the modern locomotives have computer systems in them, as well as produce much more power and are much more fuel efficient. Now, you probably noticed our train is still sitting over there by the depot on track number 1. But what we're going to do with this locomotive here is line it up for the next track over, track number 2, so we can do what's called a runaround. What that means is the locomotive will go past our train on track number 2 and then through a switch. It will then reverse through the switch back into track number 1 to recouple to the opposite end of the train. So what was the front will become the back and vice versa for the return trip. Now that we have the locomotive lined up for track number 2, for those of you that would like to see our back shop for our restorations take place, you can follow me. We're going to head right back this direction. When these ropes in, we'll take a right turn over that crossing and head to the large building in the distance. Now, those of you that don't want to see the back shop can feel free to reboard the train at any time. But like I said, if you do want to see the back shop, just follow me.